Now, let's move on to his next idea, and this is probably one of his most potent ideas along with the Übermensch, but it pairs perfectly with the Übermensch, and this is the will to power. There's probably no idea that's more popular or well known from Nietzsche than this one. He says, quote, "Life is will to power." Quote, "This world is will to power and nothing besides, and you yourselves are also this will to power and nothing besides," end quote. So none of Nietzsche's other ideas outshines will to power. Along with the Übermensch, these two are probably his most signature ideas, and they pair together. The Übermensch will be the first person to come along and truly exercise a full-blown, full-tilt will to power and set aside all traditional moral ethics and social mores and so forth. All right? And so this person will essentially wipe away the last men, taking humanity to a new stage of evolution. So will to power is the ethic of the Übermensch. And so the doctrine of will to power itself contains some very enigmatic themes, and we'll look at some of those towards the end of the lecture. But first, let's talk about another concept that goes with will to power, and that's Amor Fati. Amor Fati literally means, in Latin, love of fate, love of one's own fate. And so he says, quote, "My formula for human greatness is Amor Fati, not wanting anything to be different, not for all eternity." Will to power is what's left over after Nietzsche kind of hammer smashes through all of the so-called hollow idols of God, transcendence, good and evil, the soul, and so on, the afterlife. With the key components of Western thought now lying in fragments, nihilism again looms, and Nietzsche is going to try to point a way forward. With the slate clean now, and none of this old baggage kind of hanging around, we can now create our own world, our own values, our own truths for our own needs. And so we are going to fashion out of our own wills, our own will to power, what we want to be true, okay? So free will and determinism have also been two horns of a dilemma for humanity for a long time, no matter what the worldview. But Nietzsche is going to try to create a kind of third way here, a tertium quid. He's going to try to find a way in between determinism and free will, and that is his will to power. Now, whether it works or not, that's another matter. But let's be clear. Nietzsche does not really believe that we have any true freedom. Why would he? A material world that runs like a machine, we saw that before, right? How does that allow any free will for anyone? Remember that any full-tilt materialistic worldview is going to have some type of deterministic framework for human beings from which they can't escape. And if they do speak of choice and free will and so forth and so on, they've usually softened it down or watered that idea down to mean something else, okay? So Nietzsche says we should practice this Amor Fati, the love of our fate. This is a deterministic idea. You know, you remember Nietzsche was a philologist who could probably read ancient classical Greek, very easily. He could probably dream in classical Greek. He was a professor of philology for a decade. And so he fully understood these ideas of fate from the Greek world and so forth. So he uses this idea that we should love our fate. We should love the kind of destiny that we have no choice over. So we'll see in the next section that he ties this into a particular philosophy of history, okay, that he calls the eternal recurrence. But the bottom line here is that we are fully determined, even though he wants to soften it. But he's kind of like a Stoic on this. Stoics, too, had a fully deterministic worldview. But free will is an illusion, okay? He says, quote, "The inner world is full of illusions." That would be the inner world inside me. "The inner world is full of illusions. The will is one of them. The will no longer moves anything. There are no mental causes at all," end quote. So we are fully determined, but yet everyone thinks that we can freely choose. How is that? It's an illusion, he says. And so note that most contemporary atheists today really have nothing else to add here and just simply agree with Nietzsche on that. They may not mention Nietzsche, but the idea of consciousness and free will and rationality. Contemporary atheists have really no way to explain these and just say that they're all illusory, okay? So he says, quote, "The actor himself, to be sure, is fixed in his illusion of free will." So we're all kind of deluded into thinking that we make choices. We're all deluded. Now he's going to tie this into morality here in just a second. I'm going to show you why he believes this. But he believes that we're all operating under just a sheer illusion. He offers no evidence for this, really. He simply hates the heavy consequences of free will, and free will does have very, very heavy consequences. And we're going to see that a lot of worldviews, or I could show you at least a lot of worldviews that really wind up in a kind of deterministic view of human nature. And a lot of it is to escape the kind of heavy consequences of the idea that we have freedom. But there's no scientific evidence about free will or determinism. There's studies and so forth that have tried to study this, but there's no scientific evidence that we have free will or that we are determined. It's just not something that science can look into right now. Or for that, it may not ever be able to look into it, okay? It seems problematic to think so. But let's talk about free will, responsibility, morality, and guilt. Now that's a lot of things there. But Nietzsche explains that there is a kind of chain reaction that starts with the belief in free will. He dislikes where free will takes him or where it takes anyone in their thought system, and so he's going to reject it. So let's see if we can follow this out and connect the dots here. Belief in free will is essential to responsibility. We greatly desire to hold people responsible for their actions or their inactions, okay? We try to order our society, order our world, our families, and so forth and so on. And we have to have this idea of responsibility. And in order to make responsibility work, we have to assume or believe that people have free will. So, free will gives you responsibility. Without that, without responsibility, society just begins to disintegrate, whatever type of society that you want to imagine. Responsibility is essential to morality. Moral systems, outside just the descriptive views, but inside normative moral systems, they tend to tell people how they ought to believe and how they ought to act and behave and so forth. But morality depends upon guilt, okay? One who doesn't do as he should do is made to feel guilty, or even further, to be punished. Why? Why is he punished or made to feel guilty? So he can serve society and not himself. So the free will is like the flintstone, if you will, that serves as the spark for society and for civilization. But Nietzsche says it's all an illusion, and he is going to try to explode it. And in his attempts to explode free will and show that it's a pure illusion, we now live in this kind of egoistic aftermath. So you see, free will gives you the right to believe in responsibility. Responsibility gives you the right to believe in morality. And morality gives you the right to then punish people or reward people even, if that needs to be the case. So he's going to reject all of this and see that it's just a big control mechanism, okay? So what about will to power and tenacity? There's a kind of related concept here. The one who has will to power is tenacious, who is not going to give up easily. It creates a kind of mental toughness, if you will. So what then is will to power if there is no free will? If free will is an illusion, then what on earth is will to power? If I must love my fated life, Amor Fati, how can I will to power? This Nietzschean paradox makes sense if we consider will to power as a kind of natural tenacity to survive. But is that all it is? Is will to power merely synonymous with survival of the fittest? He doesn't use that term, by the way. But the ideas do share some common ground there. But it seems as if will to power is something more than just survival of the fittest. Everything, he says, has a natural tendency to do what it must, and we are no exception. So what Nietzsche really seems to be saying is that traditional morality works against this innate natural tendency to flourish. Traditional morality is, for him, now that God is dead, it's just dead wrong. And there is no transcendence. And so morality has to go. And this is where what you wind up with. So traditional morality stifles the natural urges of instinct that drive us on to evolve.